There is a supernatural world that surrounds us. Sometimes it manifests to people like you and me. Very special guest today, Russ Brault. He's a student of the Shroud, and I would call him a full-blown syndenologist. He has been studying this literally for decades, and he will be speaking at the Prophecy Watchers Conference. You're going to want to see this because it's going to be an amazing presentation. Anyway, we'll get into this interview here in just a second, but first a word from our trusted sponsor. Hey folks, Elliot Marzulli here. Groceries, rent, and gas aren't the only bills rising to unaffordable levels. Air conditioning bills are reaching record highs. As summer approaches with scorching temperatures from heat waves, a shocking 20 million households are behind on their power bills. Folks, make yourself happy and cool as I am this summer by visiting www.easysummercool.com. That's once again, www.easysummercool.com, or simply click the link in the description for 60% off today with a 60-day risk-free guaranteed and fast USA shipping. Check it out, folks. Once again, easysummercool.com. Russ Brault. Russ, thanks so much for coming on the record. It's always great to see you, and we'll be together at Prophecy Watchers. You know, the Shroud, and I'll just hold this up so the folks can see it. I got this from you. I keep it on my Bible. This is what he looks like. This is the real deal. Let's speak to that before we jump into, no pun intended, the holy fire. So
right.
why is the Shroud important? As a Christian, it doesn't alter my faith. My faith is in Jesus, but I call it God's calling card. Speak to that, please.
Well, I think it's intriguing from an apologetic standpoint. You have to think that Peter and John ran to the tomb. And Mary, of course, Mary's the one who gets there first, sees that the stone has been rolled aside from the entrance. She peeks in, sees that the body's gone. Mm-hmm. She runs to find the apostles, and she says to them, someone has taken our Lord's body out of the tomb, and I don't know where they put him. So Peter and John run back down to the tomb. John makes a point of letting everyone know he got there first. And then Peter finally gets there.
Let me stop you right there. I've always loved that because he goes out of his way. I beat Peter. I'm faster. It's unbelievable.
Exactly. It's recorded for all time.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just, it always cracks me up when I get
It is funny. So Peter finally gets there. He goes straight inside the tomb. He sees the linen cloth lying there. Then John goes in. He also sees the linen cloth lying there and believes. But what does he believe exactly? What does he believe? I mean, so he saw something about this linen cloth lying there that caused him to believe in the resurrection. Mm-hmm. Now, this is no secret. Jesus had mentioned on numerous occasions that he was going to rise again from the dead. That's why they had soldiers posted outside the tomb, because there was this rumor that this Jesus was going to rise again. And so the question is then, what did he see? And what's curious is that there's no reference in the Bible of Jesus leaving his image on his burial shroud. So the naysayers will say, "Aha! See, if there was an image there, the Bible would have mentioned it." Well, I'm not so sure. Is because when the gospel accounts were written 30 to 40 years after the events, that's when persecution was in high swing. I mean, do you really think they're going to mention specifically this burial shroud? And Peter has it, and it's stained with the blood of the atonement, and marked with the image of his resurrection. You think they're going to mention that? It would set off a search and destroy mission.
Exactly.
And so there's a reason why the scriptures are mum on it. But now let's fast forward past Constantine. Now it's safe to be a Christian. There are a few really good references. Here's one from the 6th century, and it translates that same verse of scripture that we're talking about, John chapter 20, verses 1 through 9. It says, Peter and John ran to the tomb and saw the recent imprints of the dead and risen man on the linens. Well, my goodness. That's not in scripture, but it's 1,500 years old. Does it go all the way back to 1st century? I mean, I think it probably does. And so that begs the question, in what did they see? So from an apologetic standpoint, we have to think of it this way. Was the linen cloth lying there in the tomb only for the benefit of Peter and John? Or was it for the benefit of the whole world throughout all generations?
Wow. Wow. Let me
And
let me ask you,
go,
is it possible? I mean, once again, I'll hold this up. So this is your track. I just love it.
yes.
Um, you know, and this is fairly recent. So the cloth, this photograph is what, almost 2,000 years old
Yeah,
of what the shroud looks like.
right.
Is it safe to say, with speculation on my part, so Peter and John arrive there and the shroud is laying there. The imprint is much, much more bold, much clearer, much more pronounced than this image that we have. Is that a safe statement?
It's possible, but we just really don't know it.
No,
Is because there are references to the faintness of the image going back over 1,000 years, and so it's hard to know. It's hard to know, and
well,
it's
let me ask you this, because we know, I mean, like you, I'm not even close to where you are. I consider myself a amateur syndenologist. I've been studying this for 44 years since I became a Christian. But we know that the image is fading. We know
yeah.
that for a fact that the image is fading. And based on that, if we extrapolate backwards 2,000 years, and I get it, this is conjecture, but when they run into the tomb, could that image have just been just in your face, no pun intended, but wow. I mean, they know
Yeah.
something's going on.
Yeah, again, there are theories related to that rather than the image fading, we believe that the cloth itself is yellowing, reducing the contrast
Okay.
between the image and the cloth. So if you can imagine the cloth being very clean and white in its original, now it's kind of more of a sepia color. It's almost like a tan, and so the image reduces its contrast as the cloth gets more and more yellowed as a result of being exposed to oxygen and the atmosphere and things like that. So that's probably why the image appears to be fading. It's just losing contrast.
Okay. There's another I don't want to use the word relic. That just sounds like, but I for lack of a better term, and you know exactly what this is, the Sudarium of Oviedo, which has been there
Right.
since the 16 or the 6th century, 7th century, right around in that. It's been in Spain, and there's apparently 30 or perhaps even more points of congruency between the Sudarium of Oviedo and the Shroud of Turin. Speak to that.
Well,
And
there's
why
over
that's
seven. There's over 70 points of congruence.
I stand
But
correct.
but you have this cloth called the Sudarium, which is associated with the napkin mentioned in John's gospel that was about Jesus's head. And this was a cloth that was probably wrapped around Jesus's head when he was on the cross after he gave up his spirit, but before he was removed from the cross, because it would have been a tradition to cover the face of the dead. And you can imagine Jesus, after giving up his spirit, he's hanging on the cross. He's got blood all over his face from the crown of thorns. He's got stuff coming out of his nose from pleural fluid. His lungs getting filled up with all this stuff. And so they said, "May we?" So one of the women, no doubt, went up to the centurion and said, "May we cover his face?" And so they would have put a little step stool up there, wrapped his face with this towel. It's a cloth about 20 by 30 inches. It was like a small bath towel. And this would have remained on his face until they got him to the side of the tomb, and then they would have placed the body onto the long linen shroud. Remember, the shroud is 14 feet long, 3.5 feet wide. So they would have placed the body on the lower half of the shroud, take that face cloth off, roll it up, place it next to the body because it had blood on it. Anything with blood had to remain with the body, and then the upper portion of the linen shroud would have been wrapped over him lengthwise. And then Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus would have hightailed it out of the tomb because the Passover was about to happen. And so it was a hasty burial, and they didn't have time to anoint the body or wash the body or do any of those things. Now, this Sudarium of Oviedo is associated with the shroud by the same blood type, AB blood type. There are pollens from plants in and around Jerusalem that are common to both the linen shroud and the Sudarium. Like I said, there's about 70 points of congruence. Now, on the Sudarium, there's no Fates image. It's just kind of a mess, is really what it is. It's just this kind of combination of pleural fluid, pleural effusion, as they call it, as well as some blood stains. And this evidence of pleural effusion is pretty much proof that this is associated with a crucifixion, because that's how people died. When they were crucified, their lungs got filled up with pleural fluid because of the ordeal. And so this cloth, no doubt, was associated with a crucifixion. And why would you keep any cloth associated with a crucifixion unless it was a crucifixion of Jesus? I mean, why? You'd burn it. It's So it has a documented history starting in Spain around 614. And so this it's very intriguing, and it just adds more weight to the whole story. So
and of course, in modernity where we are, we have the science that can go in and test the blood types are the same. We can superimpose, as you mentioned, 70 points of congruency. So we can take a Sudarium, overlay that to the shroud, and we see, wait a minute, whoever this man of the shroud is, once again, I'll use the other image, the positive image. There he is. And
yep.
The scourging is so brutal. I can barely look at it. The scourging is just barbaric.
And that's, of course, is the image as it appears in a photographic negative, which was discovered in 1898. And that's really what launched the shroud into the realm of scientific investigation. And when you think about it, the shroud was associated with the Orthodox Church for the first 1,200 years or so. And then in 1204, it was stolen from Constantinople by during the Fourth Crusade by the French, and then it goes underground for about 150 years. Nobody knows where it is because there was an edict of excommunication put on anybody who stole relics from Constantinople and did not return them. Well, what's the chance? I mean, nobody's going to return any of these things. No. And so it goes underground, and then reappears in Lorraine, France in 1356. And so it starts off with the Orthodox. Now it moves to the Catholic because it's Catholic France, Catholic Italy, and then finally in 1898, when it was photographed, it launches into the interest of Protestants, not from the standpoint of a relic to be venerated, but rather as an artifact to be analyzed. And so from that standpoint, now all the Protestants get involved. And, we had this big team of scientists go to Turin in 1978, 33 American scientists. There were only a handful of Catholics. Most of them were Protestants, Jews, and agnostics. And so it was really very eclectic. And so it's intriguing that it's really made its way through all three major branches of the Christian faith.
Let me ask you this. There was and I already know the answer to it because you and I have talked about this a lot before, but there was the carbon-14 dating that was done on the shroud, and that's a whole. I remember Barry Schwartz talking about that and going, they had they were going to take 3 different samples from 3 different parts of the shroud. These guys in black suits walk in, shut the whole thing down. They take it from the bottom corner, pick up the story from there. What happens?
Well, they violated the sampling protocol. They were supposed to cut 3 different samples from 3 different locations. Instead, they cut 1 sample from the outside corner edge, exactly where it had been held and handled hundreds of years, because they would literally hold it up physically with their hands. A bunch of people on a platform holding it up outside for public viewing. And there's it's documented at least 275 times it was held in this manner, with people holding on to that corner. So they literally picked the worst possible sample location. And so, I mean, it's like, what could go wrong, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
And so then in a, what's curious is that in 1989, the carbon tests were done in 88. In 89, the British journal called Nature published the results of the carbon date, but the Oxford Museum oversaw all of the dating. They oversaw the 3 different labs that were involved, but the Oxford Museum did not give all of the raw data to Nature magazine or Nature, the scientific journal. And as a result, and they did that on purpose, is because if they had provided, because they did over 85 tests and they didn't provide all of the data. And so had they provided all of the data, which we finally got in 2019, through the under duress from a Freedom of Information Act, they finally had to release all the data. And lo and behold, we come to find out that it would not have passed the statistical validity to achieve their so-called 95% confidence factor. And so what this raw data meant was that there was something messed up with that sample. Something was wrong with that sample taken. Now, whether it was contamination, whether it's some kind of a medieval reweave, which a lot of us think that's what it was. Of course, there are others that think it's subjected to some neutron event. It doesn't matter. All we know is that corner, now we know for a fact, was not homogeneous. In other words, it was not fully representative of the entire cloth. Mm-hmm. Now you have other dating methodologies that have now come in and shown that it appears to be 1st century. And so now we're kind of we kind of almost have to put carbon dating aside, realizing that we have no idea what they dated. And now we know for a fact that the sample that they dated was not representative, period. And so what I spend a lot of time with is going through the historical trail and showing very clearly that the Shroud has a historical trail that predates the alleged carbon date of 1260 to 1390, because we know for a fact that it was in Constantinople in 1204 and was stolen during the 4th Crusade. Well, it didn't just get there in 1204. It had been there for hundreds of years. In fact, the historical trail would tell you that it arrived there in 944. Wow. Well, now that's getting pretty far away from the alleged 1260 date that the carbon labs gave it. And then we know where it was prior to 944. It was in Edessa, which today would be in southern Turkey, and was there for hundreds of years. So the historical trail, absolutely, throws out the carbon date. So,
and then of course we've got the Sudarium of Oviedo with the 70 points of congruency, like you just corrected me a little while ago. Thank you for that. I thought it was 40, now it's up to 70. So they're corrected. But you've got the Sudarium, which is, I mean, obviously there's a definite connection, and we know that arrives in 614, as you just stated. So let me Let me ask you something. There's another dynamic here, and you're going to be talking about this at the Prophecy Watchers Conference coming up at the end of June. I will be in the front row. And we're also filming you. We're going to do a film on this subject, which I'm about to bring up, the Holy Fire. So I had never heard about this until Bob Ulrich was talking to you, and one thing led to another, and I got the books, and now we're going to be interviewing you, and you're sort of the tent pole for this film we're working on. We've sort of put all the other films that we thought about doing on the back burner. This is center stage because it's important. First question is this: the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. That's controversial. Some people say no, it's not the tomb. It has to be on the Mount of Olives. Let's speak to that first. Why could that be the actual place where the tomb is?
Well, the Orthodox Church is the oldest church in the world, and they have historically always thought that it was the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Now, as you know, historically, the Jews were booted out of Jerusalem finally and completely around 130 AD, in that time frame. And the Romans, who were ferociously anti-Christian and anti-Jewish, they were pagans. And so they would purposely build pagan temples on top of the various Christian sites that were there and Jewish sites, in order to basically preempt them and to say that this is now a pagan site. Well, after Constantine came in and instituted the if you will, the Holy Roman Empire, and so now Helen, Constantine's mother, was tasked with bringing a whole bunch of people down to Jerusalem to find all these sites, and allegedly found the original cross and brought that back to Constantinople, but she was tasked with excavating and unearthing all of these sites. And so it was very easy for them to find the original sites, because the Romans had built pagan temples on top of them, and they all knew historically that this was the site where Jesus was laid to rest. And there's this, I don't know what the particular temple was, or what god it was that the Romans worshiped that was built on it, but there's a whole historical documentation of how they removed every bit of that temple, took it way away. They could use nothing of it could be used in the excavation and in the building of this new church, in honor of the resurrection. And so they were very meticulous about making sure that they used none of the pagan stuff. It had to be completely removed. They couldn't reuse any of the materials. And so I think that's a pretty good basis to go on, to think that that's probably the original side of the tomb. And one of the problems with the garden tomb, as I understand it, is that the scripture tells us that was supposed to be a brand new tomb, but that was owned by Joseph of Arimathea. And yet, if you go in the tomb, you see there are people that are interred there that predate Joseph. So it would suggest then, well, maybe that's not the right tomb. It's I just kind of tend to go with the historical tradition of looking at the oldest church in the world with the Orthodox, and looking at their traditions and think that there's probably some basis for it.
Let me ask you this. So we've got the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Now, when I was there in Jerusalem, we didn't have time to go there, so we didn't. And now looking back at it, I really wish I had gone. So you've got the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and this is a huge edifice, and it was destroyed and then rebuilt. But
Right.
the original slab of stone, which allegedly is where the body of Jesus was kept, and there you hold up the shroud again, because that's so important to see it. So he's laid on that stone. There's another building inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is called the Edicule. and that building surrounds the stone slab where the body was laid.
Correct.
This is where we get into the so-called holy fire, which has been manifesting allegedly for since the third century. I believe it goes back further, but we know from written historical records that it goes back into the third century. Talk about the so-called holy fire, why it's important, and you'll be speaking at the Prophecy Watchers Conference. So,
yeah, there's this phenomenon, and it's been going on, like you said, for 1,500 years, and every Orthodox Holy Saturday, as it's called. Now, it's the Saturday preceding Easter, so the next day would be Easter or Resurrection Day, however we want to call it.
yeah.
You know, is now the Orthodox don't celebrate the same Easter that we do. Theirs is based on a different determination. Is that for them, Resurrection Sunday is the first Sunday after the Jewish Passover and after the spring equinox.
Interesting.
And so hence it's always different from ours. It's usually a week to up to 3 weeks later. And consequently, because we don't celebrate the same date as Easter, this thing's been kind of obscure. And it's and in fact now the Catholic Church participated with the Orthodox, but only up until 1238, and then they kind of had a parting of the ways. So ever since 1238, this has been entirely a kind of a Greek Orthodox thing, and it's so here's what happens. So they have the patriarch of the Greek Orthodox Church would come to Jerusalem on that Holy Saturday, and earlier in the day, the Israeli authorities would go into this edicule, search it, make sure that there's no matches or lighters or anything else in there. And then they'd close the door and seal it with a wax seal. And then around 1:45, now then all during the morning and afternoon, there's all kinds of processions of people coming and reciting prayers and singing ancient songs, and so, but then at 1:45, this the patriarch he takes off all of his fancy robes and vestments and put on just a plain white robe, and he's supposed to be checked, make sure it doesn't have any lighters or matches or anything on him, and then he has in his hand 2 bundles of candles, 33 candles in each hand, and it's like you have a candle, but the stem is really small stem, so you can hold on to a bunch of them. And so he goes in to this edicule. They seal and they close the door. After he goes in, it's sealed tight, and it's dark in there. There's the candles are not lit, and he begins to recite a series of prayers that have been said for hundreds and hundreds of years. And at the conclusion of the prayer, what happens then, as he's described it, and there's a beautiful a description by the patriarch Diodorus, who was the patriarch from 1981 to 2000. It's a great testimony that he talks about his experience with it. And he'll say that what starts off as after he says his prayers, then there is this bluish light,
right,
that starts to emerge from the slab of the where Jesus was laid, and he describes it as like kind of a mist on a lake, and it just has this kind of movement, this light, if you will, and then this bluish light. Now we would call this probably plasma, which is known as the 4th state of matter. It's not gas, it's not solid, it's something else.
right.
And it's and this plasma light forms a column above this slab. And then at that point, the patriarch takes his bundle of candles, puts them into this bluish light, and they ignite. Now, this is phase two. So the first phase is this bluish plasma that appears over the slab. The second phase is when the patriarch lights his candles, and now they're on fire. But here's the curious thing about this fire, is that it doesn't have heat, or very minimal. And you see these pictures of people putting the fire up to their face, and you got fire, you got flames all over them, and they're putting their hands on it and putting their clothes. You have women putting it up to their hair and stuff. And so anyways, patriarch then emerges from the edicule, and he begins passing this fire to everyone else. And now there's usually about 2,000 people inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre waiting for this to happen. Now they all come with unlit candles. And so some of these candles are lit directly by by people passing one flame to the other, but other candles are lit spontaneously. Yeah. They just boom, they just light up.
That is unbelievable.
And so this is now this holy fire takes on this. It has this. It's at best would be warm. It's not hot. It's just kind of warm. But it gradually takes on the characteristics of normal fire after about 20 minutes. Right. But initially, like I said, you got people, the fire's going all over their faces and everything else, and people are just joyous. They're just so ecstatic that this is going on. And of course, the significance of this is that it relates directly to something we know from Scripture on the day of Pentecost, with tongues of fire, right? Tongues of fire lighting on the shoulders of all those who were being filled with the Holy Spirit. Wow. And then there's the burning bush of Moses, right? You have a fire that the bush isn't burning up. It's the same fire as it was on Pentecost. And so we have a biblical counterpart for this phenomenon. And the Orthodox have always associated holy fire with the resurrection. And you and I both know that the Holy Spirit is the power of the resurrection. Mm-hmm. So now this has been historically documented all the way back to, I think the first incident recorded is maybe 330 or so. And then there's another recorded incident around 370. And then there's many more after that. There's a gentleman by the name of Harris Skalodakis, right, who has been to this ceremony 15 times, and he's traipsed to all kinds of libraries all around the world to unearth all of these ancient manuscripts that have documented accounts, and they're all similar. They're all basically telling the same story over the span of 1,500 years, and it's so now what's bringing this into the modern era. Our friend Giulio Fanti, who is really a prodigious researcher on the Shroud, and he lives in Italy. He's with Padua University, and he went to this holy fire ceremony in 2019 and brought instruments to measure it and everything else. He did his own experiments, just pictures of him with the fire up on his own face, and then he measures the actual heat he has a flame from the holy fire and has a lighter and lights a candle with a regular fire, and there's a clear difference in terms of the thermal qualities. And then he also has this little cloth of, say, linen that he puts 3 centimeters above holy fire, puts it 3 centimeters above normal fire, and radical. There's a light singeing with holy fire, with regular fire. This burns right through it. And it's so there's clearly a measurable difference. And then there's some Russian scientists, one by the name of Andrei Volkov, who's a specialist in plasma, and he went there in 2008, and he did measurements, and there's a clear electrical discharge that occurs about 2 minutes before the patriarch comes out of the edicule with his lit candles. About 2 minutes prior to that, there's this discharge of electrical activity all over the church, and he measures it with his instruments. People can feel it on their arms. You know how your hair stands up on its ends. Everyone's feeling it, and then with like 2 minutes later, the patriarch exits the edicule with these lit candles with holy fire. So there's the presence of some kind of electrical discharge. There's the presence of plasma. In this case, it's kind of like a low heat. Now, plasma is almost like it's like a light, but it's combination gas and light, but it is a negatively charged field, and so the reason that this is significant is because one of the attributes of the shroud is that we know that the image appears like a scorch, but yeah, exactly. It looks like a scorch, but it isn't. It's not the result of heat. And the reason we know that is because those strange markings and the kind of the parallel lines those are all burns and patches from a fire. And when we look at the burns under ultraviolet fluorescence, they fluoresce because they're made with heat. Yet if you apply fluorescence against the actual image, it doesn't fluoresce. So it looks like a scorch, but it isn't. So what can possibly bring about a scorching effect without the use of heat? Now this is why this is significant from kind of a clue as to understanding maybe how the shroud image actually came to be. My view, putting all this together, I think, now borrowing something from physicist John Jackson, I think as the body of Jesus wrapped in that shroud, it was converting to a volume of light. Remember, light has no mass. And as it was converting to a volume of light, it vanished. And leaving in its place where the body was this plasma field of negatively charged ions. And the cloth gradually descends through this plasma field, perhaps singeing it, creating this effect that we see on the shroud, which is combination of light, combination of plasma, combination of whatever. And but in any theory that we have that tries to explain the shroud image has got to explain what happened to the body. And the body was gone. Yeah. And so so we'll never know exactly what happened, but I just think that this satisfies a particular criteria of something that looks like a scorch but isn't the result of heat.
You know, adding one more biblical point to this would be when they touch the ark. They steady the ark. The ark's being transported, and they reach up. He reaches up to steady the ark, and instantly there's some sort of a charge.
Right.
Which,
yeah.
And he's down on the ground.
Yeah, he was like shocked. Yeah.
And it's
it killed.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
You know, what are we really looking at here? And so you've got the ark, you've got the tongues of fire, because remember, in their vernacular, they're trying to explain what it looks like as they're all sitting around the table in the upper room, and all of a sudden they're born again and spirit filled, and that tongues of fire are over their heads. Well, how else are they going to, they're not going to say plasma because they don't know about plasma back then.
Right.
They're going to call it what they is closest to their grid system, which would be tongues of fire. Interestingly enough, you're going to be talking about all this, and it's just fascinating to see. One more point, I get it with the matches and the lighters and all this stuff. Okay, so let's go back 300 years or 500 years. So there are no lighters, there are no matches 500 years ago. So unless this guy's got, a coal, a hot coal,
Good point.
right? I mean, how's
Yeah.
that going to work? And why
Yeah.
would it be? I mean, surely somebody would have debunked this thing hundreds and hundreds of years ago. I remember reading in the book on Holy Fire that a Muslim cleric is standing outside and won't allow the Christians to go in at all. So nobody's in the eticule. All of a sudden, the flame appears and the lights start happening. He converts to Christianity.
Right.
It's unbelievable. Yeah. I give up. It's just, wow. We're running out of time. Russ, thanks so much for coming on. I'll give you the last word. You'll be at the Prophecy Watchers Conference, folks. There's still room there. You can live stream it, prophecywatchers.com. We'll be interviewing you. Thank you so much for doing it.
I have to make one announcement.
Go ahead, please.
And that out right today is my book, Shroud Encounter, Explore the World's Greatest Unsolved Mystery.
I'm in.
And the last chapter is all about holy fire.
Wow.
And it's it probably won't be available on Amazon for about another 2 weeks.
I'll pick it up in Colorado.
I will have them there at the Prophecy Watchers Conference.
Do you have them now? Because if you do, I'll order it immediately.
I don't have it right now.
Okay.
This is just an advance copy. But I will have them in bulk at the
I'm your first customer, let me tell you. I'm right.
Okay.
Wow, what a great interview. Thank you so much for coming on. Folks, the supernatural world is real. I know there's a lot of scoffers out there and naysayers, and I get that. Do your research. Spend an hour on shroud.com. I challenge you to spend an hour, shroud.com. Check it out for yourself. This artifact has been probed, looked at, and studied more than any other artifact on the planet. I call it God's calling card because, in my opinion, it's forensic evidence of what I believe is the greatest event in all of history. Anyway, there is the supernatural world that surrounds us. Sometimes it manifests to people like you and me. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.
Officials endeavoring to obtain all hot flying saucers.
Marcel's own words, it was something that he'd never seen before. Something from another world. In our opinion, Marcel was a patsy.
Just verbal directions that we know what about it.
That his father was telling the truth.
He dead in the eye, and he said, it really happened. And he held his hand up just like this. They had 6 fingers, not 5.
He said they looked quite a bit like us.
Do you think your grandfather was a patsy?
100%.
The cover-up by the U.S. military.
Do you believe our government has made contact with intelligent extraterrestrials?
I can't discuss in public setting.
Do we have the bodies of the pilots?
Biologics came to some of these recoveries.
He deliberately obfuscated and made lies to the American people.
When the Pentagon decided to lie about what happened at Roswell.
Because standing 6 feet away, this little being about 3.5 feet tall.
She said the nurses who were there during the crash, they're now at a convent.
The first book that Randall wrote, and he said to Jess, he said, that's not fiction.
But for everybody, I mean, it's just a human thing. It's a worldwide changing, be life-changing for everyone.
Was certainly not a weather balloon and not something from this earth.